At my birthday dinner, my mother-in-law smirked and said, "We didn't get you anything, you're too old for gifts." I smiled and replied, "Good thing I didn't buy anyone tickets to the vacation I planned." The table went silent as I showed them the canceled reservations. I never expected a birthday dinner to change my life. It was supposed to be a simple evening dinner with my husband's family at a nice restaurant in Chicago. Nothing fancy, just a quiet gathering to mark another year. I didn't even want a big celebration. I had learned, over time, to lower my expectations when it came to birthdays. Owen, my husband, was never the kind of man who went out of his way to make special occasions memorable. He wasn't cruel or unkind, just absent in a way that made me feel like an afterthought. A man of habit, he approached life with a sort of passive endurance. He worked, he scrolled through his phone, he existed in a comfortable rhythm. And for the past 6 years, I had existed alongside him. His mother, Sylvia, on the other hand, had never been passive. From the moment we met, she had made it abundantly clear that I wasn't what she wanted for her son. She wasn't outright cruel. She had a talent for making her Barb seem almost innocent, like tiny paper cuts that you don't notice at first, but eventually start to sting. "Oh, you don't cook?" she had asked me the first time we had dinner at her house, her voice laced with surprise as I reached for a store-bought dessert. "Well, I suppose not everyone is meant to be domestic. It's good that you have a job," she mused another time. "You never know these days. Some women just expect men to provide for them. Little things. Always little things." Owen would sigh and brush it off when I brought it up. "That's just how she is," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But she did. I knew she did. And that night, at my birthday dinner, she finally gave me the excuse I needed to stop pretending I didn't see it. The restaurant was lively, a classic Chicago spot with dim lighting and just the right amount of noise to make everything feel warm and intimate. I had chosen it myself, wanting something nice but not extravagant. Owen had barely cared where we went. He was on his phone when I walked in, only glancing up briefly to greet me before returning to whatever had his attention on the screen. Sylvia, of course, was already seated, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping idly on the table as she waited. She looked up when she saw me, giving me a tight smile. Hannah, Owen's younger sister, gave me a more genuine grin. She was the only one in the family who didn't seem to have an issue with me, not particularly close, but not cruel either. Their father, Frank, sat beside Sylvia, quiet as always, watching the conversation like a man who had learned long ago that silence was the safest option. We ordered. Drinks arrived. Conversations drifted in and out, most of them circling around topics I had no place in. Owen barely spoke to me, only addressing his mother or nodding along to something his father said. I sipped my wine, feeling that familiar weight settle in my chest. Then, when the food arrived, Sylvia leaned back in her chair, her lips curving into that familiar smirk. "Well," she said lightly, "we didn't get you anything, dear. You're too old for gifts, don't you think?" There it was. A small, simple sentence, but loaded with intention. Hannah made a quiet noise in her throat. Even Frank shifted slightly, as if he could sense the tension that suddenly thickened the air. Owen? He didn't even react. Didn't glance up. Didn't seem to care. I sat there for a moment, my fork resting against my plate, letting the words sink in. And then, for the first time in a long time, I felt something snap. I smiled. Not a forced, awkward smile, but a real, slow, deliberate one. The kind of smile that came when you had been pushed just a little too far. "Oh, that's actually perfect," I said, my voice light. "Because I was planning a little trip for all of us. A nice vacation. But since I'm too old for gifts, I guess there's no need for me to give anyone else anything either." I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and with a few taps, brought up the canceled reservations. I turned the screen toward them. A 5-day trip to Maui. Fully booked. All expenses paid. Now canceled. The silence was deafening. Hannah's mouth parted slightly. Frank blinked, his gaze flickering to Sylvia. But it was Sylvia's reaction that made it all worth it. Her smirk vanished. She stared at the screen, as if unable to process what she was seeing. "You're joking," she said finally, her voice no longer carrying that usual air of smugness. "Nope." I took a slow sip of my wine. "I figured we could all use a break. But hey, you're right. No need for gifts." Sylvia didn't speak. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. And Owen? He finally looked up from his damn phone. His brow furrowed slightly, like this was the first time he realized something was happening. "Wait. What?" I placed my phone face down on the table and picked up my fork again, completely calm. "I booked a vacation. I was going to surprise everyone with the tickets tonight." But I guess there's no need for that anymore. Owen stared at me, then at his mother. His mind worked slowly, like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that should have been obvious. The table remained silent for the rest of the meal. But something had shifted. Something big. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it. The beginning of the end. The weight of every year I had swallowed my feelings, every moment I had let myself be pushed aside, was finally pressing down on me, and I knew I wasn't going to do it anymore. But neither Owen nor his mother knew that yet. Not yet. But they would. Very, very soon. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. The tension sat thick and unmoving, like a storm cloud refusing to break. I took my time eating, savoring every bite of my steak while Sylvia barely touched her food. Hannah poked at her plate, eyes flicking between me and her mother, looking like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure which side to land on. Frank, as always, remained silent, chewing slowly, his gaze unfocused, as if mentally checking out of the whole situation. Owen, though. Owen was staring at me now. Not speaking, but looking at me in a way he hadn't in years, like I was suddenly a stranger. As if he had just realized, for the first time in our marriage, that I was capable of pushing back. Good. Let him be surprised. The check came, and I reached for my wallet just as Owen sighed and tossed his credit card onto the table, barely looking at the bill. Normally, I would have thanked him, would have leaned over and kissed his cheek in a quiet display of appreciation. Tonight, I didn't. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my dress, and gave Sylvia one last, easy smile. Well, I said, this was fun. Let's do it again, never. Then, without waiting for anyone to say anything else, I grabbed my coat and walked out into the crisp Chicago night. Owen followed. I knew he would. The ride home was quiet. Owen was driving, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly, the tendons in his fingers flexing in agitation. I could hear the faint sound of him grinding his teeth, something he always did when he was holding something in. It took him until we hit Lakeshore Drive to finally let it out. Was that really necessary? I turned my head slightly to look at him. Was that necessary? You know what? He exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening. The way you acted tonight. You embarrassed my mother. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Oh, poor Sylvia. The woman who has spent years making me feel unwelcome in my own marriage. Yeah, I can see why she's the real victim here. Owen clenched his jaw. You didn't have to do that. Didn't I? I turned my body slightly toward him, my voice calm but firm. Tell me something, Owen. If I hadn't said anything, if I had just smiled and laughed like usual, would you have even noticed how she treated me? He didn't answer. That was the thing about Owen. He was good at ignoring things. Ignoring his mother's jabs. Ignoring the way I shrunk myself over the years. Ignoring the slow, steady erosion of our marriage. And now? Now, I was done being ignored. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. By the time we got home, the silence between us was so thick that I could feel it, pressing down on my chest. Owen went straight to the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge and popping the cap off with more force than necessary. I took off my coat, draped it over the back of the couch, and then, finally, turned to face him fully. Do you even understand why I did it? I asked. Owen let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Because you wanted to prove a point? I studied him for a moment. No, Owen. I did it because I'm tired. He frowned, taking a sip of his beer. Tired of what? Of you. Of this marriage. Of your mother. Of never feeling like I come first. I didn't say those things. Instead, I just exhaled slowly. Tired of pretending like things are fine when they're not. Owen ran a hand down his face, rubbing at his temple like he had a headache. Look, I get that my mom can be difficult sometimes, but she's just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it. There it was. That same tired excuse. That same dismissal. And something inside me, the last frayed, tattered thread of patience, snapped. I took a deep breath and said, Do you love me, Owen? He blinked, clearly caught off guard. What? It's a simple question, I said, my voice quieter now. Do you love me? His hesitation was brief, but I noticed it. Of course I do, he finally said, setting his beer down. I nodded, absorbing that. Then why don't I feel it? Owen's face twisted in frustration. Jesus, where's this coming from? Because of a stupid dinner? No, I said simply. Because of everything. And just like that, I saw it. The way his posture stiffened. The way his hands curled into fists. He knew. He knew what I was saying. But he didn't want to say it. Because that would mean admitting that things had been wrong for a long time. It would mean acknowledging that he had failed me. So, instead, he scoffed. You're being dramatic. And that? That was it. That was the moment I realized, without a doubt, that we were beyond saving. I stood there, staring at the man I had once believed would be my forever and felt nothing. No anger. No heartbreak. No sadness. Just clarity. And I knew then, this was over. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And when it happened, Owen wouldn't even see it coming. The rest of the night passed in a fog. Owen, frustrated and tired of the conversation, turned on the TV and cracked open another beer, making it clear that, to him, this fight was over. That we'd had our little spat, our awkward dinner, and that now I was supposed to just let it go. And for years, I would have. For years, I had let things go. I had swallowed my feelings, rationalized his behavior, convinced myself that this was just how marriage worked. But I wasn't doing that anymore. So instead of sitting beside him on the couch and pretending nothing had happened, I walked upstairs to our bedroom, closed the door, and for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself imagine a life without him. And you know what? It didn't scare me. It felt light. The next morning, I woke up before Owen. It was a habit of mine. While he could sleep in until noon if given the chance, I had always been an early riser. I liked the quiet of the morning, the way the world felt still and new before the day really started. But that morning was different. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of me, and I started making a list. A list of everything I had overlooked in this marriage. At first, the list was simple. Little things. The way he always chose his mother's side. The way he rarely said, "I love you," first. The way I always had to plan everything, vacations, date nights, even his own birthday parties. Then the list grew. The way he didn't ask about my day. The way he never made an effort with my family, even though I spent years trying with him. The way he could be in a room with me and still make me feel alone. And by the time I was done, staring down at the messy, scrawled words in my notebook, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I had been unhappy for years. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Owen finally came downstairs an hour later, groggy and still irritated from the night before. He didn't greet me. Just went straight to the fridge, grabbed the orange juice, and poured himself a glass before sitting across from me at the table. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Then, without looking up from his drink, he said, "Are you still mad?" I stared at him. Still mad? He really thought this was just about last night. I could have left. Instead, I just took a sip of my coffee, set it down carefully, and said, "I'm done, Owen." He frowned. Done with what? I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingertips to the rim of my mug. With this. With us. His expression darkened. "Oh, come on, you're being ridiculous." There it was. The dismissal. The immediate assumption that I couldn't possibly be serious. That I was just being dramatic, emotional, irrational. But I wasn't. For the first time in years, I was clear-headed. I leaned forward slightly, meeting his eyes. "When was the last time you made me feel loved, Owen?" His face flickered, just for a second. "That's a stupid question," he muttered. "No, it's not." My voice was quiet. Steady. "When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered?" Owen rubbed his temples, his patience thinning. "I don't know, all right?" Jesus. Why are we even talking about this? Is this still about my mom? I shook my head. "No, Owen. It's about everything." He scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You're really going to throw away 6 years of marriage over one bad dinner?" And there it was. That was the problem. He really believed that last night was the issue. That it was just one bad moment, one little argument that we'd eventually get over. He didn't understand. He never understood. I stared at him, feeling this deep, almost aching sadness settle into my bones. "You haven't heard a word I've said, have you?" I whispered. Owen ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I don't know what you want from me, okay? What, do you want me to apologize?" "Fine. I'm sorry my mom hurt your feelings. There. Can we move on now?" I closed my eyes. There was no getting through to him. No fixing this. I had spent 6 years trying to hold this marriage together, hoping that one day Owen would just see me. But he didn't. And he never would. I opened my eyes, looked at the man I had once loved, and accepted it. This was over. Maybe he didn't know it yet. Maybe he still thought this was just another argument, something we'd move past like all the others. But I knew. I knew I was done. And this time, I wasn't going to change my mind. I didn't say anything else that morning. There was no point. Instead, I finished my coffee, closed my notebook, and went upstairs to take a shower, letting the hot water wash away the last remnants of whatever attachment I still had left to this marriage. By the time I stepped out, towel wrapped around me, I felt light. Clear. The sadness was gone. In its place? Resolve. The next few weeks were interesting. I didn't tell Owen right away that I was leaving. I needed time. Time to make plans, to get everything in place before I finally walked away. So, I played my part. I smiled when I needed to, cooked dinner like usual, slept beside him in the same bed. But emotionally, I had already left. And the best part? He didn't even notice. I stopped making conversation. He never questioned it. I stopped reaching for his hand when we walked outside. He didn't care. I stopped initiating intimacy. He barely seemed to notice. It was almost comical. For years, I had worried about what leaving him would mean. I had agonized over it, terrified that he'd be devastated, that I'd be tearing apart something he cherished. But the truth? Owen didn't cherish me. He cherished the convenience of me. And that was what I was about to take away. By the time I was ready to go, everything was set. I had found a new apartment. A beautiful loft downtown with big windows and enough space for me to finally breathe. I had spoken to a lawyer, sorted through finances, and made sure everything was in order. And then? I planned my revenge. A quiet, perfect kind of revenge. No screaming. No fighting. No grand dramatic exit. Just calculated, careful destruction. It started with our joint accounts. Owen, bless his oblivious heart, had never paid much attention to our finances. That had always been my job, managing bills, budgeting, keeping everything running smoothly. So when I started slowly draining our shared savings into my personal account, he didn't notice. I didn't take everything, just enough. Enough to make sure that when I left, I wouldn't have to worry about money for a long, long time. Enough to force him to finally take responsibility for his own damn expenses. Then, I canceled all the auto payments that I had set up over the years. The mortgage, the car payments, the utilities, all of it. I wanted to see how long it would take him to realize that he was the one who had to handle things now. Then came the credit card. We had one joint credit card, one that I had used for household purchases, groceries, bills. I maxed it out. Not on unnecessary things, but on smart things. Things for me. A brand new laptop. A first-class flight to Paris, because why the hell not? A shopping spree that filled my new apartment with everything I had ever wanted, but had never allowed myself to buy. By the time I was finished, the card was done. And Owen? Still. Had. No. Clue. Then, I planned my exit. I picked a weekend when I knew Owen would be away, a guy's trip he had planned with his friends. He barely even mentioned it to me. Just assumed I'd be home, waiting for him like always. Perfect. As soon as he left that Friday morning, I called a moving company. By the time the sun set that evening, every single thing that belonged to me was gone. Clothes? Gone. Furniture I had bought? Taken with me. All my sentimental items? Packed and secured. Even the damn coffee maker. Then, the final touch. I wrote a letter. Not a dramatic, heartbroken goodbye. Not a desperate plea for him to change. Just the truth. A list, really. Of everything he had done wrong. Of everything I had tried to fix. Every moment he had made me feel like an afterthought. And at the bottom, I left one final note. Check the bank account, Owen. And the credit card statement. And the bills. Figure it out. Oh, and by the way, I canceled your Netflix. Good luck. Then, I walked out, locked the door behind me, and never looked back. The fallout was glorious. When Owen finally came home that Sunday night, expecting to find me waiting with dinner like always, he found nothing. No wife, no furniture, no money, just an empty house and a maxed-out credit card. I ignored the first few calls. Then the voicemail started. At first, they were confused. Babe? Where are you? Then, frustrated. What the hell is going on? Then, furious. You are such a petty, vindictive BCH. You think you can just leave like this? And finally, desperate. Please, just call me. We can fix this. I never responded. A week later, Sylvia called. I debated letting it go to voicemail. But then, I thought, why not? I answered. There was a beat of silence. Then, in a voice dripping with venom, she said, "You've really done it now, haven't you?" I smiled, stretching out on my brand new, gorgeous couch in my sunlit loft. Yep. She exhaled sharply. You're a selfish little, I hung up. Blocked her number. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, stepped onto my balcony, and breathed. For the first time in years, I was free. And it felt amazing.